Good morning. I'm going to go over all of the questions from the homework so that you guys can understand how to do them, and I'll explain them step by step. Also, if you want to practice extra, I would suggest doing some of the odd ones before class tomorrow so that I can answer your questions. On Friday, we had an hour of class, an hour of office hours, and I didn't answer very many of your questions because you guys didn't have any. So here we go, step by step. So the first thing you want to do is you want to check to see if any of those terms have a number in common. In this case, they don't. So we're going to multiply the first and the last term together. That gives us -6. And in order to get multiply to -6 and add up to -5, we're going to use -2 times -3. So those numbers always go in these diagonals. And you have to have the variable that's on the middle term. The first term, 2x squared, goes in the first box. The last term, -3, goes in the last box. When you factor this, you look to see what these two have in common at the top. They have a 2x in common. And then the easiest thing to do is say 2x times what gives you the first box. So that's going to be an x. And then 2x times what gives you -2x. That's going to be a -1. Then x times what gives you -3x, that'll be a -3. So your answer is 2x minus 3 and x minus 1. It does not matter which order you write those in. For number 4, you're trying to find the factors that multiply to 2 that add up to -5. There are only two numbers that multiplied to 2, 2 and 1. This cannot be factored. And that problem's finished. For the next one, there's nothing that goes into all of these numbers. You always want to check that first. So we are looking for the numbers that multiply to 30 that add up to 11. Most of you figured that out. But if you're not sure, just list them. 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 5 times 6. So it's going to be 5 times 6. Everything's positive in this problem. So again, the two numbers that you found, those go in the diagonals, 5x, 6x. And the first term goes in the first box. The last term goes in the last box. 2 and 5 don't have any numbers that go into them, but they do have an x in common. You're always going to have an x on the outside at least. X times what gives you the 2x squared? That would be 2x. X times what gives you 5x? That's going to be a +5. And then 2x times some number gives you 6x, and that will be a +3. You need to make sure you use signs there. Everything's positive, so everything will be positive. So you have 2x plus 5, x plus 3. For the next problem, you're looking to see if they have anything in common. They do. 3 goes into all of these, so we're going to factor out a 3. It gives you 4x squared minus 8x minus 3. Now we're only working with the inside, and we're checking to see if we can factor that. So we're looking for the numbers that multiply to -12 and add up to -8. So we have 1 times 12, 2 times 6. Now if you do 2 times 6, that 6 will be negative, or the 2, one or the other, but it does not give you -8. That gives you -4. Okay, this gives you -11, and then we have 3 times -4, which is -1. So none of those work, so this is your answer. A lot of you use -6 and -2. You cannot use -6 and -2 because a 12 is negative. Okay, if the 12 was positive, then you could factor this further. Number 10. For number 10, there's no number that goes into all of those because 17 is prime. So we're going to multiply 12 times 6, which is 72. And we need to get 17. Now, the square root of 72 is going to be 8 point something. That means you only have to try 8 numbers. So everything's positive. So 1 times 72, 2 times 36, 3 times 24, 4 times 18. 5 doesn't go into that. 6 times 12, that gives you 18. We're getting close. 7 doesn't go. 8 times 9. So if you thought of 8 times 9 ahead of time, then you don't have to make that list. But if you cannot think of it, then you need to make the list of everything that goes into 72. You can't just try to guess and check. Make a list, start at the number 1 and work all your way down to the number 8. Again, you only have to try the numbers up to the square root of 72, which is, like I said, 8 point something. So we have our numbers. Put them in the box. Those numbers go in the diagonal, the 8 and the 9, so 8x and 9x. The order in which you put those there do not matter. The first term is 12x squared. The last term is 6. So again, we're going to try to see what these two have in common. We're going to definitely take out an x. 12 and 8, one number goes into both of them. So if you want, you could just think of those as if they were in a fraction, 8 and 12. How would you reduce it? You would divide them by 4. So 4x goes into both. 4x times what? Gives you 12x squared. That would be a 3x. And 4x times what? Gives you 8x. That's going to be a plus 2. Next, to finish this, you're going to say 3x times what number gives you 9x, and that will be a plus 3. And now you're done. This is 3x plus 2 times 4x plus 3. For the next problem, whenever you have two terms, if they don't have anything in common, then they both have to be perfect squares. This is a perfect square, that's not. That means you cannot factor this. Now, if this was 4x squared minus 25, then you could factor that. You would factor it in 2x plus 5, 2x minus 5, but you can only factor when they have two terms if they're both perfect squares and the middle has to be a subtraction, has to be a difference of squares, okay? So on your homework, you cannot factor that. Number 14, they don't have anything in common, okay? They do not have anything in common. So we have to multiply these out. So 18 times 14, that's 252. And we need to get negative 9. Now, when you do this, if you do the square root of 252, it's like 15 point something. Okay, so that means you have to try the numbers 1 through 15. So you're going to have to make a list. Most of us don't know the numbers that go into 252. So, and I know it's going to be negative. I'm just going to put some numbers there until it looks close to 9. 2 times 126, that's not going to work. 252 divided by 3, that's 3 times 84. That's definitely not giving me 9 yet. 252 divided by 4. 4 times 63, I still won't get 9. And again, the bigger number is going to be negative here. We don't have to divide by 5. 252 divided by 6. 6 and 42. That's still not working yet because that gives me negative 36. This gives me negative 59. But the numbers are getting smaller, as you can see. So 252 divided by 7, that 7, and then negative 36. I'm getting closer. 252 divided by 8 doesn't work. 252 divided by 9. 9 and negative 28, that gives me negative 19. Getting closer. 252 divided by 11, because 10 doesn't work. 252 divided by 12. 12 times negative 9, or 9 times negative, or excuse me, 12 times negative 21. Now, it did take a while, but if you just follow it consistently, you know you only have to try 15 numbers and you have a calculator. You don't have to write them all down if you don't want to, but you definitely have to try them all on your calculator. Actually, do write them so that I can tell that you're doing this work. So we are going to be using 12 and negative 21. It did take some time, but eventually you're either going to get to an answer or you're going to pass all the numbers and nothing will work. All right, so let me go ahead and do the box here. We're going to use 12x and negative 21x. Again, the first number goes in the first box, 18x squared, and the last number goes in the last box. The two numbers, the 18 and the 12, have a 6 that goes into both of them and an x. So 6x times 3x gives you 18x squared. And then 6x times 2 give you 12x. And then 3x times some number gives you 21x. So that would be minus 7. So we have 6x minus 7 and 3x plus 2. For number 16, if you look at all these numbers, you should be able to recognize that 7 goes into all of those. Okay, so 7 times 6x squared plus 5x plus 1. Next, we factor the inside of this. So if we factor the inside of this, we're looking for the factors of 6 that give us 5. That's 3 times 2. So that will be 3x and 2x. This will be a 6x squared. That'll be a 1. These two numbers, the 6x squared and the 3x, have a 3x in common. 3x times 2x gives you the 6x squared, and 3x times what gives you 3x? That'll be a 1, and that's positive. And then 2x times what gives you 2x? That's also going to be a 1. And so we have a 7. You do need to include the 7. You have a 2x plus 1, and you have a 3x plus 1. Now, let's say that you forget to take out the 7, and you multiply 42 times 7, which is 294, and you had to get 35, and you used, let's see, what would go into that? So 294, it'll be 14 and 21. So let's say you did that. Now, that's not going to give you the wrong answer. It's just not going to be complete. So if I finish that problem and use these two numbers instead, 14x and 21x, and then I use the original numbers, 42x squared and 7, which some of you did, then you have to pick out what these two have in common, which is a 14x. And then here, you cannot pick what the 42 and the 21 have in common because you're going to get the wrong answer. You have to figure out 14 times 3x gives you the 42x, and 14 times 1, and then 3x times the 7. And as you can see, if I did it this way, you would get 14x plus 7 and 3x plus 1, which is the same as this. You just have to take out the 7 at the end instead of the beginning. I always recommend taking out the greatest common factor first because it'll make the factoring a lot easier. For number 18, all of these numbers, 4 can go into all of them. You should factor out a 4 first. That's 20x squared plus 17x plus 3. Then we're going to factor the inside. So that will be a 60 to get 17. Again, the square root of 60 is 7 point something, so you only have to try the numbers 1 through 7. Okay, so 1 times 60, 2 times 30, 3 times 20. That gives you 23 because everything is positive in this problem. So don't be careful there because 20 times 3, you could get 17 if that 60 was negative. But the 60 is positive, so that will give you 23. 4 times 15, that's going to give you 19. 5 times 12, that gives you 17. So we definitely need to use 5 times 12. So 5x, 12x, and everything is positive, which means all of your parentheses are going to have positive numbers in them. We have a 20x squared here, and then we have a 3. So the top two have a 5x in common. 5x times what gives you 20x squared? That would be 4x, and 5x times 1 gives you 5x. And then 4x times 3 gives you 12x. So we still have the 4 that's in front that you've taken out. You cannot get rid of that. And then you have the 4x plus 1 and the 5x plus 3. In the next section, we're going to be solving these for x. So we will have to set the equation equal to 0, and then we will have to factor and then set those equal to 0. and I'll go over that now. You might want to try it ahead of time if you'd like. Okay, for the next section, we are going to be solving the equation. That means that you will have two answers for x at the end. The questions will have equal signs in them. And not only do I want you to solve, I want you to solve by factoring. Okay, because there are different ways to solve, but we are going to be solving by factoring. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the equation is equal to 0. If the equation is equal to 0, then you can go ahead and factor like we did above. You always want to look for greatest common factor. They do not have anything that goes into all three of them. So we're going to multiply. So that's negative 18 to get negative 3, which will be negative 6 times 3. So we'll do the box method. Some of you guys on your homework did the box method for some, and then you try to do grouping for others. You should use the same method all along. It doesn't make sense to switch back and forth between different methods. So 2x squared is first, minus 9 is last. We're looking to see what these two have in common, the 2 and the 6. So we have a 2x. You never want to put a negative number on the outside of this, but 2 goes into both of those, and then also x, and then 2x. Times what gives you 2x squared? That will be an x. 2x times what gives you the negative 6x? That's going to be a negative 3. And then x times what number gives you a 3x, and that will be a positive 3. So we have x minus 3 and 2x plus 3 equals 0. You must have this step where you have factored and it's set equal to 0. If you do not have that step, you will be marked off. Okay, so once it's factored and set equal to 0, then you can solve by setting each of those equal to 0. So if you can do that in your head, that's fine, but you set them both equal to 0, and then you solve for x. So x is equal to 3. On this side, you also set 2x plus 3 equal to 0, subtract 3. So 2x equals negative 3, and then divide by 2. So you get x equals, I will just write x on this side. This is why it's good to use your own paper, because then you have as much room as you need. So you have two answers, x is equal to 3, and x is equal to 3/2. For the next problem, when there are two terms, it needs to look like this. Something squared minus something else squared, which this does. When that happens, you're going to get 3x plus 2. You basically figure out the square root of both of them, and 3x minus 2. And the reason for that is because you basically have 0. You have nothing. You can do 9 times 4 to get nothing in the middle if you want. You could do negative 6 times positive 6 and do the box if you want to. But whenever they're both perfect squares and there's a minus, you could just take the square root of each one. So 9x squared splits up into 3x times 3x, and negative 4 splits up into positive 2 times negative 2. Don't forget the equals 0 part. You must have that equals 0 part. Once it's factored and equal to 0, you set them both equal to 0. So 3x equals negative 2, x equals negative 2/3. I'm taking a little bit of a shortcut on these. Add 2 to both sides and divide by 3. So your answer is plus or minus 2/3. For the next part, again, these are going to take a lot more room, so I'm going to actually space this out. You guys should probably use your own paper on this, but you need to set these equal to 0 first. So I'm going to add 32 to both sides. This gives me 18x squared plus 48x plus 32 equals 0. So these all have a number 2 in common. They're all even numbers. 4 does not go into all of them. 6 doesn't. 8 doesn't. So this is 9x squared plus 24x plus 16 equals 0. We still have to factor to keep going. So I will be factoring 9x squared plus 24x plus 16. So I'm going to multiply 9 times 16. That gives me 144. and I need to get 24. The square root of 144 is 12, and maybe as soon as you take the square root of 144, you'll notice that 12 times 12 is 144, and it's also 24 when you add them up. So using the box method, I will be putting the 12 and the 12 in the diagonal boxes. And the first term is a 9x squared that goes in the first box, and the 16 is in the last one. Between these two, 9 and 12, the number that goes into both of those is 3. So we have 3x. 3x times what gives you 9x squared? That will also be a 3x. And then 3x, that should be a 12x, not a 12x squared there. So 3x times what gives you 12x? And that will be a plus 4. And then the last step, 3x times what gives you 12x, down at the bottom, and that's also a plus 4. So don't forget you have a 2 in front, and then you have a 3x plus 4, and another 3x plus 4, and an equals 0. You cannot forget the equal sign. We set them equal to 0. You can't set 2 equal to 0 because it's not a variable, and 2 does not equal 0. So 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract 4 from both sides, and divide both sides by 3. Now the other answer is going to come out exactly the same, so when that happens, you will write dr, which stands for double root, to show that you do have two answers. All of these have two answers. If they're the same answer, then you must put double root. For the next one, we need to set this equal to 0 first. You want your x squared to be positive. So I'm going to add 3x squared and subtract 6x. When you do that, you get 8x squared minus 8x minus 6, and these all cancel, so you get 0. You can factor out a 2. Let me move over here. 2 times 4x squared minus 4x minus 3 equals 0. We will be factoring that part. So we're looking for the factors of negative 12. They give you negative 4, which is going to be negative 6 times 2. So that multiplies to negative 12, adds up to negative 4. I will do the box over here. So the first term is a 4x squared. The two middle terms are the negative 6x and the positive 2x, and the last term is a negative 3. These two terms have a 2x in common. 2x times what gives you 4x squared. That's a 2x. And then 2x times what gives you negative 6x. That's a minus 3. Then 2x times something gives you 2x. That's a plus 1. So this is 2 times 2x minus 3 times 2x plus 1. You set them equal to 0. So if you set this equal to 0, I'm just going to take a shortcut here since you should know how to solve those at this point. So this one's going to give you 3/2, and this one will give you negative 1/2. If you're not sure how to do that, set them equal to 0 like we did up here and solve. For the next problem, it looks complicated, but you just need to add everything over to this side. So we have it set equal to 0 first. Add or subtract, you do the opposite. And then we're going to add 18. That means the right side will be a 0. This is going to be 32x squared minus 36x plus 9. Now, these do not have anything in common. The 9 only has 3 times 3, and 3 doesn't go into 32, so nothing in common. So we have to multiply 32 times 9, which is 288. And we need to try to get negative 36. So you need to start, and these are going to both be negative. So negative 1 times negative 288. That doesn't work. Negative 2 times negative 144. That doesn't work. -3, so 288 divided by 3. -96, that doesn't work. And again, if I take the square root of 288, it's 16.7, which means you have to try the numbers all the way to 16. I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. So that is going to be -12 times -24. Instead of making the list, because I don't have any room to finish that list, but you should be going 1, 2, 3, all the way down to, so you get to -12. Using the box method, we're going to put -12x and -24x in the box. The first term will be a positive 32x squared, and the last term will be a 9. You have to be very careful when you're doing these. 32 and 12, they have a 2, they have a 4 goes into both of them. 6 doesn't. So, but if you put the 24 up here instead of the 12, then you would make sure you use 8 on that case. In this case, it's a 4x. And then this will be an 8x, because 4x times 8x gives you 32x squared. And then 4x times -3 gives you the 12x. And 8x also times -3 gives you the 24x down here. So when I factor this, my factors will be 8x minus 3 and 4x minus 3 equals 0. You still need the equal 0, and you still need to solve for x. So when you solve this for x, you get x is equal to, for the first one, 3/8, and for the second one, you get 3/4. Now, normally you would be writing, if you're not sure how to do that, 8x minus 3 equals 0. You would add 3, and then you would divide by 8. If you can see, it's always going to be the second number divided by the first number and then the opposite sign. Then you can go ahead and write the answers down. And again, this is why it's better to use your own paper, because it's all crammed in here on this worksheet. I have extra room because I'm on a computer, but you guys would not. So you need to make sure you try to do this so that you can follow your work and I can follow your work as well. For the next part, that's a y, but we're still going to factor and set those factors equal to 0 to write it in intercept form. So there's no number that goes into all of these together. So we multiplied 12 times -15. That gives you -180 to get 8. The square root of 180 is 13. So you only have to try the numbers 1 through 13. So 1 minus 180, that doesn't work. I'm 2 times -90, 3 times -60, so on and so forth. You keep trying them. It will be -10. We want the small number to be negative, excuse me. Because the 8 is positive, so it will be -10 times 18. Okay, you will list again all the numbers from 1 through 16, unless you can think of those ahead of time. Using the box method, this will be -10x, this will be 18x. The order in which you write those does not matter. This will be 12x squared minus 15. These two have a 2x in common. And then that will give you a 6x here and a 5. If you notice that the top two numbers have something in common, that means you didn't take out the biggest common factor at the beginning. So like if this was like a 6x and an 8, then you would know that you should have taken out a bigger number there. Here, 6x times a positive 3 gives you 18x. So we have y is equal to 6x minus 5 and 2x plus 3. You set those equal to 0. So 6x minus 5 equals 0, and you solve that. And 2x plus 3 equals 0, and you solve that. You end up getting your two answers for x are 5/6 and -3/2. Do not use decimals, use fractions. For the next one, These do not have anything in common because 5 doesn't go into 24, and it's the only number that goes into 25. So if you multiply those together, you end up getting negative 600, and you're trying to get 10. The square root of 600 is 24, so you have to try all those numbers. Instead of going through them, well, I guess I could go through them all to show you how long it would take. So 1 times 600, I'm not putting the signs in yet. I know that they have to subtract to 10, so I'll put the signs in after. 2 times 300, 3 times 200, 4 times 150. Actually, if you take the square root of 600, it's 24, and that number's small. We could probably start with 24, then 23, and so on, and move backwards. It might be easier, but I will just go this way. So 600 divided by 5. 600 divided by 6. So far, this will give me 94. This is 115. 600 divided by 8, because that's still not going to work. 600 divided by 9. 600 divided by 10. So the numbers are getting smaller as we go. 600 divided by 12. So that gives you 38. 600 divided by 15. 13 and 14 don't work. So this gives me 25. So the next one will be 20 and 30, and that gives you 10. The other numbers in between don't work. So if you knew that, again, ahead of time, you do not have to make that list. So negative 20x, positive 30x. Again, the first number goes here, 25x squared, negative 24. So these two have a 5x in common because 5 goes into both of them. 5x times 5x gives you 25x squared, and 5x times minus 4 gives you 20x. The next part, 5x times what gives you 30x, and that would be a plus 6. So that gives me 5x minus 4, 5x plus 6, and you set them both equal to 0. This one would be 4/5, and this one would be negative 6/5. Again, to solve those, I don't think that's really the problem that you guys are having. It's the factoring, but you would do 5x minus 4 is equal to 0. So you would add 4 to both sides, and then you would divide by 5. For the second one, you would do 5x plus 6 equals 0. You would subtract 6 from both sides, and then you would divide by 5. For the last one, these are both perfect squares, 4x squared and 1, but there's not a minus sign. So this one has no solution because you can't factor it. If that was a 4x squared minus 1, you could factor it into 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1. But it's not. An only way to factor when you have two terms is that they have to be both perfect squares and there has to be a minus sign between them. If not, then you cannot factor it, so there is no solution. So that covers the even problems. I would recommend you try the odd problems or the extra examples that I sent you for homework. And tomorrow, which is Monday, we have 25 minutes in class to go over questions. And if you guys still are unsure, I might have an extra office hours tomorrow night, or you can send me questions through Remind either today or tomorrow, and I will help you. But make sure you come to class, and I'll probably get there a little bit early during first period so that you guys can ask questions.